Yield now to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just astonished, and I'm sorry, Mr. Cummings. I usually don't respond directly to what someone else is saying in their opening statement, but all of that has absolutely nothing to do with this hearing whatsoever, and I hope that you actually sit down and read this report. There is nothing in this report that says that they were not involved in the PBG's decision-making with respect to Delphi and salary retirees. In fact, this report is about the hourly, not the salaried. And you're going to see that when we have this discussion. In fact, it does say on the hourly the opposite of what you just said. Again, if you'd read the report, page 38 says, I'm going to quote it, the auto team's role in the decision to top up the pensions of Delphi's UAW's workers was not advisory. Consistent with the auto team's practices with any liability, it would have been Treasury's decision as the buyer to assume or reject the liability to top up the pensions of Delphi hourly UAW employees. The auto team actively negotiated and made the overall deal. Now, there is partisan politics that shouldn't be happening here in this hearing, and the GAO report was not as extensive as this SIG-TARP report has been. And I want to thank Ms. Romero. Thank you for your in-depth review. This is the first time we've ever really had an insight into what the Auto Task Force did. And I must tell you, it's just shocking, because remember, the last hearing that we had, Mr. Cummings, the last hearing we had to have it because these gentlemen refused to even talk to the Inspector General. They said we'd left the government, we no longer have to answer questions on the work that we did. We've had to subpoena Treasury just get to the bottom of what happened in these things. So now I want to give some context of what we're doing here today, because this really, really is important. And this is the fact that in the TARP process, what occurred was not just the tragedy of the Delphi and salary retirees getting their pensions cut unjustly and I believe illegally, and the courts will determine that, but what we had was the entire process was thwarted. Because of TARP, normally when you have a bankruptcy, each of the parties who have an interest in either the new entity that's coming out or the old entity that is going through the bankruptcy process sits in a chair and represents their interests, or they have someone who sits there in a fiduciary capacity representing their interest. But what we had with TARP was this perversion of the process where each and every person sitting around the table suddenly became the Treasury Department. The banks became the Treasury Department, the lien holders became and bondholders, the PBGC became the Treasury Department. Each and every one of these people became the Treasury Department. And what we kept saying throughout all of this, which is why we're having this hearing today, is tell us how you made your decisions. Tell us, once you had all of these chairs, whether or not you go to the standard of protecting the fiduciary interests of the people who were behind you, because we don't believe that you did. What we find now from the SIG-TARP report, which is the first time we've ever had any insight into what occurred in the decision-making, we understand that they set this unnecessary and artificial timeline of the quick wash, that they set the terms and the conditions, they determined who had leverage and who did not, some political, some not. And it clearly, throughout all of this, is this concept of exceeding and abusing authority, this concept of commercial reasonableness that this group used to as a standard for determining their decision-making that had no definition and no legal justification, had people rewarded and people who were penalized. The administration picked winners and losers, and that's what this report says. And that's what we're going to get to today. Now, this does not decide the issue of PBGC and the Delphi salary retirees. It was not intended to. This hearing is not to determine the end of the PBGC issue and GM issue with respect to the Delphi salary retirees. That we will have to continue. GAO, when they did their report, only looked at public sources. They didn't have access to what the Inspector General did, where they looked at the documents and looked at the emails between these individuals. And the SIG-TARP Inspector General did not check or review the GAO work to determine whether or not additional documents were necessary or whether or not the documents that they had needed to have the GAO report amended or redone. But it tells us what we didn't see before. The administration has said they were not involved. They said they didn't do it, that they only were on the sidecar and watched as General Motors made the decisions. And what we know now from this report is the decision-making was absolutely being made by the auto task force individuals themselves, that the 4 Treasury auto team officials played a direct role in GM's decisions and obligations up to and through GM's bankruptcy. Treasury's auto team had significant leverage and influence on GM's decisions leading up to and through the bankruptcy, first exerted by replacing the GM chief executive. So if the document itself is allowed to go through this hearing, instead of us just reading our own text that our staffs have written, I think we'll get to what really is the truth. What really happened? What needs to happen? Was there injustice? And what this committee needs to do in further investigation, because this is not over. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.